Hi, everybody. My name's BJ. I'm a genealogist here in Maine. And tonight I'm going to talk about one of those things that everybody dislikes, but we all need to do, which is tracking where we got our information. In other words, citing sources. Um, Basically, I want to talk about it in a way that makes it the least painful way to do this that will get you what you need. And I admit if I am Xeroxing, photocopying um, a page out of a book, I will often just scribble the name of the book and the author there because I now know in this day and age, I can go look up the details online and I don't have to take detailed notes the way I might have had to 30 years ago in order to get the information I would need to do a citation. If I'm copying more than one page, often what I'll do is I'll copy the title page and staple everything together. And that way, the information, I've got it right there. Um, the one down bit of that is modern books often don't have the publication date on the title page. They'll have the rest of what you need, but they won't have the date. But if I'm doing a lot of copying, it's faster to do a copy of the page and scribble the date while one of the other pages is copying than to write out everything. And if I'm somewhere, if I'm in a, if I've made a day trip and I've only got 4 hours somewhere, that can be a lot. It's worth the extra 10 cents per title page to just have it there and not worry that I've copied it down wrong in my rush, anything like that. So, what I'm going to do tonight, I've got a PowerPoint I'm going to go through fairly quickly. Um, and then I'm going to show you some examples of online how you can, and I use this word semi sarcastically, cheat at doing this in ways where you don't have to remember what I've told you in the PowerPoint. So let me share my screen. And let's do the bit of resizing and such I need to do. Okay, so let's start the slideshow. So why are we doing this? There are a couple reasons. The big one is it lets you get back to the record you were using. And why would you want to do this? Well, maybe you haven't photocopied it because you're somewhere where it's, 30 cents a photocopy, or it's a book that can't be photocopied. And you want it something that you didn't copy down. You wonder later if it's there. Um, or you've found more information and something that um, you want to go back and see if there's something more that makes sense now that didn't make sense beforehand. It's a way of tracking that you've already searched a document um, and hadn't found anything. So it saves you time if you've already said, well, I've looked at this already. I don't need to go back to it. The other way is to look at how reliable the sources are, how reliable the information might be. Um, is your research credible if it's based on this? And maybe you're dealing with somebody, you're um, exchanging information from, say, someone who's descended of a sibling of your ancestor, and they want to go and find if there's more on their ancestor when you shared information. And so it makes it easier on them and you because you don't have to dredge up where you got the information from. They can just see where you got it. So there is no one right way to do citations. However, you do want to make sure that you've got the information you or someone else will need to find it, the source again. And I do suggest you choose one style, whatever works for you, whether it's one of the standard published citation styles or what works for you, and stick with it, because that will help you see if you've got missing information. It'll just make your life easier. But if you're only writing for yourself and maybe a few cousins, it doesn't matter whether you use the Modern Language Association, Chicago, Harvard, the Associated Press, the American, I think it's psychological, it's APA. That doesn't matter. You know, getting periods versus commas and such. If you're just dealing with keeping track of your own work, don't stress on that. Now, if you end up publishing, whoever you publish with generally will have their own house style, and they will have somebody to help you with that. But if you're just doing it for yourself, getting the information you need will be important. Things like punctuation won't. And let me see if I can upload a file from here and go into here. And let me see. Where did I put it? There it is. One of the things I'm going to put in the chat, and I will send this out as well. It's a citation builder worksheet, and it's got everything. Not all things you work with will have all of these elements, but it is a way to see what elements you will need. So feel free to save that out of the chat. But I will also send it so that you guys will have it. So a couple things. So for example, this is an article out of the National Genealogical Society Quarterly. And we're looking at footnote 1, where it says, it has this book, the Reynolds family of England and Virginia, that having Henry as the father of this particular Joseph. It's on page 2. The book and the author's later book include no documentation or support for assertions, although he states the compilation is based upon census reports, family Bibles, and journals, previously recorded genealogical data, wills, land deeds, etc., and information supplied by living persons. How much of that would you trust as a source? Basically, there's no way to go back and see what this relationship, this assertion of this relationship is based on. Which census reports? Who has the family Bible and journals? what do they mean by previously recorded genealogical data? What wills and deeds? Who were the living people? Were they people who were alive when these people were alive or not? There's no way to know. So that's something to keep in mind. And then there's this one I picked up on Twitter that says, this figure is from a New York Times article of the period and will probably show up if you search for these keywords. I've lost the bloody reference and confessing my carelessness to the world instead of spending the day looking for the exact piece. Perhaps you should just trust me on this one. If you can, then I thank you. Yeah, that's not going to help. You know, so just as a way of seeing that. So as I said, you want the information. Think of it as breadcrumbs. And to a great extent, you're doing a Hansel and Gretel breadcrumb trail to get back to where you were. And so if you think of it as Hansel and Greteling or breadcrumbing, what are the different breadcrumbs you need? So we'll take a look. For books, you'll want the author, the year the book was published, the title. If you're citing something in particular, you'll want the page number that it's on, the place of publication, and the publisher. Place of publication is here because traditionally you might have had two different publishers in two cities. You might have had Smith Brothers Publishing in Boston and one in Atlanta in 1870. And they wouldn't have known about each other. So that's why that's there. You get less of that now, but it's still worth keeping track of. This second one here, where I put repository and date access, and I'll show you some examples of this later. This is where if you've looked at something online, say you've looked at Family Search or Ancestry or archive.org, you would put the website and the date you saw the book. And so here we have Lipson, Charles. Generally do it last name first, because if you've got more than one, you're going to put in a bibliography, you're going to put them in alphabetical order. When I was in school, we always learned to put the date at the end. The more modern styles often put it here, and I like this because then if you have multiple things by the author, you can put them in order. Or if you have two different versions of a book, it's easily seen. Then you get the title, the page something was on, the place of publication, big cities, Boston, Chicago, New York, London, Toronto. You can just do those. Portland, you'd want to put Maine or Oregon, and then the name of the publisher. And again, part of the reason you want this is that titles cannot be copyrighted. In fact, I actually, one time last spring, picked up two books I had ordered, requested, and I looked at them and I realized they had the same title. They were two very different books, but they were both called American Passage, with then a subtitle, but they were both, the primary title was American Passage. And so having the author and the publisher would allow me to distinguish between the two. Articles are similar in terms of you have the author, the article title, and then the name of the journal or magazine it's in, the volume and issue and the date, and then the page numbers for the articles. So, and this is for if you've seen it in hard copy. And here you see, you get three authors on this one, the title of the article, the journal it was in, the volume number, the date, and I put both. Some people don't, but volume doesn't tell you how old this was necessarily. But if you just put the date, often finding things online, like with the register, it's by volume number. And then the pages this was on. If you see it online, like with the book example, you put the where you saw it and the date you accessed it. There's also this thing called a digital object identifier that is essentially a permalink for an article. You don't see it as often with genealogy magazines. You see it more with science oriented journals. But I'll show you one because if you start getting into reading some stuff about DNA, you'll see this. So you see here, this is a case where I saw this article in the Mayflower Descendant at American Ancestors rather than hard copy. But otherwise, the beginning of this is the same as if I'd seen it in hard copy. And this is the part I'm going to go through fairly quickly, but just to show you an array of what happens with genealogy is we start getting into the original records or scans of original records. And they're the ones that get tricky to cite. So let's take a look at how I did some of these. And so what you're going to want, and this is how I do it. Other people do it differently. And I'm going to put another file in the chat. So I'm going to put 2 in. Because it's a lot of examples. But what I do is I put the type of document, the year, the location, and then the date within the year, the people involved, any reference numbers, pages, file number. If there's a collection within a, either at a library where there's, the family, so-and-so, the Leroy family papers. And then say the repository would be the library or the archive. And then in this case, point of access. So you might have, this would be, say, Ancestry or Family Search. So let's take a look at some of these, just so you can see. So here's a naturalization petition. So I've got the type, the year, where it was, the date, who it's for. And in this case, he's changing his name to Lazarus Collins from Lazarus Kolinsky. So I put both names there. You'll see there's not a page number here, but there is a certificate number. And then this is a case, this is the name of the collection it was in at Ancestry, and then when I accessed it. So you see here, naturalization petition, I've broken this out, the year, the location, the date, the person involved, the reference, the collection. Now in this case, I've actually added this as where it comes from and then accessed at Ancestry. And this way I would be able to go back and find it, even if Ancestry changed their, say the collection name. I'd be able to find it with the National Archives reference. Here's one, same thing. It's a letter. It's dated 1805. There's no place indicated, so I skipped that. The date, who the letter is from, who it's to. It's part of the Weston family papers. It's at the Danvers Archival Center, and I viewed it in 2011. And as you can see here, this is the archival box it was in. And so I put that PR West W5. So this stands for private records. They do the first three letters of the surname, family surname, and then it's the fifth one. It's the fifth archival box or envelope for WES. And ideally, if I go back and give the archivist this call number, I will get this same box and this letter will be in there somewhere. Sometimes you will then, within this box, get like envelopes or folders that if there were a folder, like let's say there were 5 folders and it was in folder 3, I would have put that here as well. But this is a case where there's just one folder in the box. Here's one. I'm looked at it at Scotland's People. It's a baptism, the date. The baptism was on May 20th. To be extra careful, the birth date is here as well, so I put that. It was at the St. Mary's Roman Catholic Cathedral in Edinburgh for Catherine Murphy. She's on page 47, this first line here. Catholic Register, Scotland's People, the day I saw it. So that's the Catholic baptism. Here's, for that same child, the secular civil registration. At technically, all you need really at Scotland's People for the civil registration is this 685/4 328 plus the year. But I put it all in so somebody else knows, even though I know that's enough. Here's one. This is the original diary at the Susquehanna County Historical Society in Pennsylvania. But it's also been transcribed into the journal that they put out. And so if I'm talking about this and something I saw in person in the diary, I would use this citation. If I went and looked at the copy of this I have to see how they transcribed something, or it was a page I didn't photograph, I would use this citation. Does that difference in the citation make sense to you guys? You know, that this is the original manuscript, but let's say I only photographed half the pages because some of them weren't relevant to me. Like say it was Andrew Tracy before he married my several greats grandmother, Mary Katie Weston Tracy Miles. But there was something in the diary I saw later that I hadn't photographed. In the transcription, I would use this because it acknowledges it's a transcription and there's the possibility of error. I have found this the easiest. Other people I have seen make census citations really complicated. This works for me. And I found it works for the US, the Canadian, and the UK censuses, and for any of the state censuses in the US I've used so far. I put census, I put the year, I put the place. If it's not the US federal census, if it's a state census, I do put in parentheses state census so that I know I'm not looking at a federal census. I put the name of the person I'm interested in, the name of the head of the household if it's someone different. Here we have the enumeration district, the sheet number, and then the line the person is on. And then I did put, in this one, I put US federal census and then where I accessed it. Did I see it at Ancestry versus Find My Past versus Family Search? So here we have a will, but it's actually technically a probate file, not just the will. So I put probate. Same thing. Include the date, the book and page number. Here you'll notice there's this 78. I'm not sure what it is. In this case, I went with this pre-stamped number because I looked at some other pages and it was the most consistent number. What you do get also with probate is you get loose file pages. And Essex County, Massachusetts, and some of the other counties, when you have these loose papers, there is a file number like this. So I put that in there. So that I knew this was not the book that had the copies. This is the loose papers. This is a case with a deed where the official copy, this deed was done in 1830, but you'll notice that this says a true copy of the instrument in this book, and this is the one that's online as the official one. I don't know if I went to Lincoln County to Wiscasset, whether I would see this or the original. I keep meaning to go and haven't had a chance. But you'll note that I have the date of the deed here, and then I have official copy dated as a way to show that I didn't see the handwritten original. Okay, the full text search, I would work back to, I found this through the first full text and then worked my way back to it to cite it as I would if I had not. The full text is a finding aid, not the source. So yeah, I would then work my way back into, I went to the Lincoln County records and found this to cite it. Does that make sense as a way to do it? Partly because I do try, whenever I do something, I do like looking a few pages forward and backward just to see if, because it's not unusual to have like brothers doing transactions on the same day out of like a father's or grandfather's estate. And so I when I find something in full text, I do go back just to be able to look and see, and what else is typical from before, that particular clerk and such. So yeah, in this case, if I can find the film number and the image number, I also put that in because that way, if full text, I don't think full text will go away at this point, but if somebody hasn't been using it, this is often the film number and the image number is often the fastest way to get back to something. So I put that in if I can figure it out. So that's the PowerPoint. So let me go here and show you some of the ways I cheat. So we're at WorldCat, which most of you have probably heard me talk about before. It's essentially a union catalog for interlibrary loan librarians, but the public can use it. And so we're going to look for, let's see, let's look for Essex County probate in the title. So here's an index. Well, let's look at this one. So here we have probate records of Essex County, Massachusetts. And what we can do, see these little quotation marks? If we click here, it gives us the citation. And we can choose from several. I often look at a couple because you can see it's not really giving me a good example here, because this certainly wasn't published online in 1635. So let's look at an easier one, which would be this index, because it's a modern book. Oh, that's one she published herself. But let's look at it just because it gives you and again, that's the American Medical Association versus Chicago. This is MLA. That looks like a good citation. Let's see what Chicago gives us. I probably would take out the address here. I don't think you need that. Um, I admit to some fondness for Chicago because that's where I went as an undergraduate. And so that's what we mostly used. Um, my first master's degree, we used MLA. My second master's degree, we used APA. And I kept getting dinged on things because my brain didn't like APA. It had learned two systems already. And for some reason, it would not stick with APA. But let's do one more. Um, let's look for the book Albion Seed. That's not one I'd want to read as an audiobook, but we'll take this one. And again, we can click here on the quotes and get these, and you can copy that, and that would be good enough. Okay, question about if I've downloaded things digitally. Generally with that, I start a Word document for the project I'm doing, or if I'm attaching it in my genealogy program, I put it there as well. So those are I think are the two best options for downloaded documents. So WorldCat is great. If you create an account, you can create lists of books. Some really good stuff there. Let's take a look here at Family Search. I looked for this book in the catalog. And this is the result. And you see here, here's all of the information I would need. Title, author, 1943, published in Milford, New Hampshire by Cabinet Press. You'll see he didn't always do the best citations. These are all of the citations for this page. Whoops. Not really helpful. But the other thing that happens, if we look here at this, let me click this one away as well. At this citation, they don't give you a place to cheat and get the citation here, but they do say view this in WorldCat, and we can go here and get the citation like we did for the other bits. So if you're using books in Family Search, and this is one reason I go to Family Search over Ancestry for first, they've got more books, and secondly, they've got this link to WorldCat. So sometimes you will find citations for other things in the back of the book. I've occasionally recently seen citations for the book itself on the back of the title page. Not always, but sometimes. So let me just show you quickly, looking at some articles online. So here's one about DNA in Orkney. I'm helping a cousin who has ancestors that we don't share in Orkney. But again, you'll see here, cite this article. Now, they don't give you lots of options. There are citation managers that you can get, but I'm not going to get into that. These are articles that cite this article. And you see here that, remember I mentioned the DOI? This is essentially a permalink. And if I click on this, it will take us to that article. Maybe, if we're patient. So here it is. And you can see, it took us there. Here's the citation bit. And it tells you what it will work with for citation managers. But basically what this did, you'll see that DOI that I clicked on, here we have the regular website. So it's forwarding, but if Cell, the journal, changes their URL structure, it will still link to the article. But this is the citation for this, and you would just hit copy and then paste it into your Word document or whatever you're using. Now, this is an interesting one. This is a BBC article. And again, the link here, and you can't see it down in the bottom. You'll be able to see it in a minute, I think. But it says dx.doi.org and then has the number. But it takes us to Nature and the actual full article, which is actually very interesting. I looks like it. This is not the. I have gotten it through. You can actually access Nature through the state library's website. It's a little clunky, but if you're here in Maine, you can access Nature. Um, Here's another one. Um, this is PubMed, which is the US government, NIH. And again, cite the source. It gives you the format and you can change and do MLA or whatever until you find one that you like. And then JSTOR is more social sciences oriented, but it includes um, and if you live in Maine, you can get a Bangor Public Library card for free and get access to the full JSTOR. And I wanted to show you this because I didn't really talk about if something was a chapter in a book with where the book has multiple, is essentially different authors for different chapters. But here I'm going to show you. We're going to limit this to just book chapters. And we'll choose this one. Well, it takes a minute to cycle through. And again, you get the citation here. It gives you all of these, and notice that it's essentially very similar to what you get for an article. You have the author's name, the name of the chapter, the name of the book. You do add the editors often. The publisher, the date, the pages, and then where it was accessed. So, in this day and age, if for most things, you will be able to find an online citation for a book through something like WorldCat. So let me stop sharing my screen. Any questions at this point?
Yes, the one that you were showing that didn't have very much at the very bottom, is that one that would have the complete ones in the back of the book? I mean, I know some books that half of the book is actually citations.
Yeah, but generally it's not going to have a citation to that book itself. It's going to be everything that book referred to.
Right.
But yeah, it can get hard, but that's one reason I wanted to show you things like WorldCat, where you go and look up the book and get the citation there.
Okay.
Did that answer your question?
Yeah, no, I was just wondering because I've seen ones that have not much on the page, but like I said, the whole half of the book is nothing
Yeah,
but
no,
citations.
some books do end. Oh, you mean, yeah, end notes. Yes. It's which way they do it, whether they do it as footnotes or endnotes, depends on the publisher.
Okay.
Yeah. And there's a tendency when if I'm not doing it for somebody else, for my own work, I tend to do footnotes are informational, um, and endnotes are citations. So, for example, if there's a bit of extra information that doesn't flow with the text, but I want to put with where it's in context, um, I'll put that in the footnote.
Yeah.
So, for example, if I were writing about somebody in what's now Danvers, Massachusetts, but it was still Salem Village, I would probably put the now Salem, now Danvers, Massachusetts, or became Danvers, Massachusetts, changed its name to Danvers in such and such a year as a footnote. But the citation to say the vital records I was dealing with in the end notes, because the informational stuff, I don't want to make people have to flip through to other pages, but the citations I think can go at the end because they if someone's reading through for the first time on something, I think it's easier to not have the citations. But for example, the National Genealogical Society quarterly puts everything at the bottom in footnotes, nothing in end notes. So that's, but I tend to distinguish between those two things in terms of how I do footnotes versus end notes. That actually would be an interesting topic, I think, one of these days to talk about how to put a report together and what. So one of these days I may do that as a topic.
I don't know. Interesting. It's like when I was in college, I had to do a term paper on the comma. You talk about weird.
Yeah. Um, so a lot of it is, and most of us, I know I certainly, I go from high school to college, to multiple graduate schools, working as an editor, working as a genealogist, working as a librarian. It could get very easy to get caught up in the minutia of citations, which is one reason I'm glad we are now able to do that cheating on so much because you don't have to do it as you want to know enough to know when you look at one of those. There were a couple there when I hit citation, it gave us something that wasn't quite good enough. You want to know enough to know when you look at that, go, oh, I need a little more information there. Um, but at the same time, you don't want to get so bogged down in the details of commas versus periods versus semicolons that you get frustrated and don't keep track of where you found something. Does that make sense to everybody? Okay. Any more questions? All right, let's stop the recording.